attention creates the very baseline, the foundation of safety from which we can explore.
Wow.
And when there isn't attention given, or it's very rare, or I don't know if I'm okay. I don't know if it's okay for me to be here.
Well, hello, Katie.
Hello, Sophie.
I love these colors on you. Is it really sweater weather? We're there in Ohio?
Yes, we actually are just dipping into colder weather now, although next week is supposed to get warm again. So we're, layers, the fall layers, ladies.
I'm in Arizona and it's going to be about 75 for the next 5 months. So
yeah, really kind of perfect.
Exactly. So I was, something happened this morning that really was exciting. And then we kind of talked offline, but I really would love to get your perspective. So it started actually with Abby had a fun story to tell us, which is we were talking about working hard. Like when you are wired, like value is from how hard you work. And so she was telling us that now the client she was telling us about is wanting to work really hard at not working so hard, which I thought was so ironic and poetic. So I wanted to hear your take on that.
And also people don't realize that's what they're saying. I'm working hard so then I don't have to work too hard. And It was also just reminding me of a friend of ours years ago who wanted to make things complicated now so that they could be less complicated later. And it's the same kind of a thing. And he really didn't hear us that, well, if you make it more complicated, then it's just going to keep getting more complicated. If you want it to be simple, you need to choose simple. And
I know.
But there's so much value that's attached. And it's certainly how I grew up was that hard work is what gets you there. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, you're lazy and and selfish and all kinds of bad things. So resting was definitely, not permitted, unless you had accomplished absolutely everything that needed to be accomplished and other people's too.
So it is an interesting conflictual, of course, you're noticing the language of it. This morning, I was working with a client who also was realizing how in control he is. And he really wanted to be in control of learning how to not be in control. And I did stop right there. And I was like, oh, so you want to control the letting go of control. I see. And so again, very, very justly, as you just said, the language is already it's like if we were investigating how we speak, I feel like we would hear those things that we say, right?
And my experience is that those things are attached to what we've been taught about how to create value. Mm-hmm. And I certainly remember I was just seeing a picture of my mother coming in on a Saturday when I'm lying in bed and she says, "It's 9:00. Why aren't you up?"
Wow.
In school. And I think that whole ethic of, I wonder what's at the bottom of that. What was just occurring to me is that if I just followed my impulses, everything would just go to hell.
Yes,
everything would just fall apart.
Yeah.
And we'd be, and I'd be eating bonbons and, everything would be a mess. And so I think it's this point of view about people is that, you really do need to control people because otherwise things will just spin out.
It's almost like there's this fear, this deep fear that we're going to go crazy. I think that's what was played out in my house. Like my mom, I have no memory of my mom in bed. She would either be in bed, fall asleep, or be awake and get up. Like there was no leisure, taking a minute, reading a little book. Like it was action from the second she'd open her eyes. And I do think that at the heart of it, there was a little bit of like, if I don't do that, I am going to go crazy and eating bonbons and yeah.
Yes, it's almost as if I need to police myself.
Yes.
because and I can't trust my own impulses.
Yes.
It took me a long time to really listen to, for example, when my body needed to rest. It took me decades to actually hear and feel the signals of, oh, I'm feeling tired. before then, I was just simply an energizer buddy. I would just go until I would fall over.
Yeah.
And, and I would have then something like getting sick that would have me slow down rather than, oh, I've done a lot. I've been expressing a lot. Maybe I could have a little bit of rest and do something different. But I think at the bottom of that is in Western society is the Puritan ethic. It's, and also that people are fundamentally bad.
You're
and
right.
You have to rein them in and control them and also shame them. When I was growing up, it was all about, aren't you helping your mother? And that children are to be seen and not heard, and all of those kinds of things that didn't have us really value ourselves as people who could contribute, people who had well-being at the heart of us rather than little devils at the heart of us.
Yes, and something to contribute. Like there's this very bizarre thing, like people will talk about their children and how wrong they are. And, and I'll be like, well, did you ask them anything about what's going on for them? Like big surprise. Like, no, like, what? Why would I ask? It's like, well, I don't know. Wouldn't you ask me? Like as an adult, why would you not ask them? It's a peculiar thing.
It is a peculiar thing. And what it reminds me of is that when I discovered, like I was just remembering reading Jung years and years ago, and he had his first really mystical experiences and kind of opening to the universe when he was a kid, at 8 or 9. And we don't think of children as having an inner life.
Yeah.
That they're really all in relationship to kind of what's put in them. In fact, they for years and years, babies were thought to be a blank slate.
Yeah.
That, they didn't feel any pain. They didn't feel any pain at birth, and that then you could just program them.
Yeah.
And to actually imagine each of us as like plants that are budding, and it depends on what's in the environment, but it also depends on the seed. It also depends on, do we support what's wanting to bloom in ourselves or in others? Or do we say, okay, now you should learn how to do this and this and this. And it's basically life is hard and life is hard work, rather than what would happen? Like if you just ask, like, what's your energy level to do? What would you like to do to contribute? What are you noticing that, might need, some adjustment here?
Now, it's interesting because as you describing the journey, and I know enough about your childhood, mine, it kind of was a little bit of hard work to free myself from a lot of this. Like there are seasons, maybe. There are seasons where I had to go in there and really kind of like shake the tree a little bit. Do you think I could have gotten the wisdom without some of it? Do you think it's because we're on the other side that we feel like it's not? Like, I'm curious to know.
Well, I think that now we're choosing more our own environments.
Yeah.
That influence and also give support. Because I certainly grew up, I'm remembering that by the time I was 2, I had a very well-developed by myself. By myself, I can do it. And part of that was because I didn't feel supported.
Yeah.
And I knew from very early on that if something was going to happen, I was going to have to do it. And so I considered myself grown up. But I remember filling out, we had encyclopedias and art books and Reader's Digests at home. Okay. And I was a voracious reader. And so that's what I read. And I read a survey in Reader's Digest when I was 9 about, how was your life 10 years ago and how will it be different? But I remember taking it very seriously, like, well, because I considered myself pretty grown up at 9.
10 years ago, I wasn't there, but let me try.
But I can imagine, and I can imagine that, how it will be. And I actually experienced that I've gotten younger and younger, rather than, more and more serious, and finding that in terms of seriousness and control, that really trusting myself and asking myself, what do I want? Which is something, that people really don't ask. My clients often, they'll come in with some kind of an issue and I'll say, well, what do you want about that? And they really haven't even considered that because it's just bad. They have to get rid of it or control it. And that whole attitude, I think, makes us have not so much fun and also not be as effective, because we know that hard work is actually not as effective as play. In our Be, Love, Play, one of the reasons we talk about play is that play actually works way more effectively than working hard. And a lot of my people that I work with don't want to hear that, because, wait a minute, I spent all my life working really hard and I've done all of this and you haven't, and you're having a good time and it's not right.
Right. Right. The Puritan piece is interesting because I grew up in France, which has less of that. But I think in France, it's more about giving the appearance of something. Like if you're resting, it says that you're participating in the wrong thing. Like you're not contributing to society. And maybe that is what the Puritan thing is. I'm not sure. But I experience it differently in France. In France, it's more, if you have lunch with someone and you were to say, well, I took the weekend off and I rested, and people look at you a little bit like, you did what?
You did what? And yes, like you're an exotic flower there. What, you did what? And what did you accomplish with that? Well, our version of that in the States was, what will the neighbors think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you needed to be, you were a representative of your family. We were a representative. Like when I walked out the door, it was always, my mother said, and sometimes it was just implied, but if you do something bad, it's about me.
It's going to reflect on
me. It will reflect on me. And so I've noticed that that's a lot disappeared in a modern society.
Maybe a little too much.
That's my experience, that, a little too much, in that the relationship between work and value, I think, is part of what we're unwinding here. And how do I find my value? Because for me, in this part of life, I am not working as much. And also I've been, I think because of ageism, it's just another subject we might get into at some point, that I've sort of been pushed down the conveyor belt, like, okay, make way, make way. Well, what people are saying now about Biden is that he's too old.
Yeah.
I think, well, too old for what?
Yeah.
And and I think it's all part of that ethic of, we're working hard and we're producing and we look vigorous. And if we're working from a different point of view or a different way of using ourselves that's more efficient, it doesn't look right, and I think people get scared of, if I'm not producing, what's my value? And if I don't have value, they're really scared of that.
It's funny. I remember when I kind of cracked a nut for my own consciousness around competence. Like, it was really important. Like, I speak languages and I could do stuff, and it was a place of pride. And if I didn't feel competent, I would really not feel good about myself. And I remember this friend of mine saying, "Have you ever been around a baby?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been around babies." Like, how competent are they? And I'm like, not very. Like, and how does it feel to be around them? And it just really melted my heart that it had nothing to do with their competence, obviously. If anything, it had to do with their complete abandon and,
their being.
Exactly, their being.
Their being, but also following impulse. That's what babies are doing, is that impulses are awakening, and they're, like finding their feet and finding their hands, and then finding the outside world, beginning to reach out and, bring the world in to them. And I think at a certain point, that's what we call essence, what Gay and I call essence. And that there's a point where your essence becomes inconvenient for your caretakers.
Yes.
Like, you're just, no matter how cute you are, you still need changing and turning over and feeding and washing of the, all of that stuff. And the people start looking at you differently. And my sense is that that's when people start developing things like, what do I need to do rather than be? We move into doing. And that's when we develop all of these different habits of working hard. So, and I think the big proving that I'm worthwhile, and that at the base of that I'm lovable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I'm not doing, and I'm not producing, am I lovable? And I think that's a concern for a lot of people. And even when you tell them, if you let go of control, something else might show up. Mm-hmm. But the strategies that we've learned, like if I've learned to control, that's my main engine. And learning how to do something different, that takes some turning yourself inside out, I think.
And inside out is a good description, because if I was to compare with my own, like say my habits of eating, gaining weight, which I did for many, many years, I'm very versed in that. But I also remember this moment that I kind of became aware that it was no longer an act of self-love. Like it was very tight for me before I would eat food that were damaging, that were really hurting me. And not just because of weight, because of skin, because of energy, because of, scratch, like my skin would itch when I ate sugar, but I ignored all of that because it matched a self-destructive almost habit. And then once I changed somehow I became more self-loving. I developed a more loving relationship to myself. Then it became really difficult to do these things that were, punishing or destructive.
Well, what it sounds as if you noticed yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
So maybe just one day you noticed yourself with, the word that was coming to me was with kindness.
Yeah.
Good that word. You were more being with yourself in that, how are you? And just being with you. And what I've experienced is just a couple of moments of that can really help a whole new attitude to unveil. And usually, so that you were able to do that for yourself, is really, its own little miracle to celebrate, because most of us need somebody else to look at us with some curiosity or kindness, or just, noticing us rather than what we're doing, or what we're producing. And it's very rare, but it's such a gift. And my sense is that we don't need very many people to do that, to really be able to establish that for ourselves. But most of us do need that. Like, oh, yeah, you're worthwhile. I see you.
I remember when I went from someone would give me a compliment and I would immediately switch to some version of, well, if you really knew me, right? If you spent more time with me, you'd realize that I'm not. And I remember later someone gave me a compliment and I kind of was like, oh, wait, what? Like it didn't do the thing. It was like, yeah, you're right. I'm very kind. That's very nice of you to notice. But there was no, let me tell you how much that's a lie, that I'm a
There's no bounce off. Well, that's part of, I think, what culture teaches us to do is, to deflect. Yes. And we've actually had little experiments with people, because I can remember Gay trying to compliment someone on her apple pie. We had gone to a party and she made this apple pie, and this is a delicious apple pie. She, oh, well, the crust is wasn't quite right because the flour was a little old. And he would say, well, oh, it's certainly the most delicious one. And she just kept deflecting. And so after 4 or 5, he just gave up. It was like, oh, she's really committed to not letting appreciation in. And I think that's one of our big tasks right now, is to receive, is to receive others' attention, to receive, like that, so I'm taking you in, Sophie, and the color, and how the color brings forth the vividness of your face. And I'm just taking that in and celebrating you. You haven't done anything. You're just there being you, but that's a source of nourishment. Yeah. When I'm connecting with you, I can feel the essence you, and I can receive that. And then that gives nourishment to me. And I think that's a lot of what goes on in relationships that really work. We're being and loving each other.
One of my favorite things I do when I work with people, mostly maybe in corporate, but maybe somewhere else as well. Like I'll notice someone comes to me and speaks about you and says, well, Katie, blah, 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 blah. And like gives me all these like compliments and all. And then I'll say, oh, that's wonderful. Does she know you're saying that? And they'll be like, oh, no, I would never say that to them. say that to you. I'd be like, why would you not say that to them? That's such a
right. It's sort of a positive form of gossiping.
It's a bizarre. I mean, in my childhood, I remember these moments where if I wanted to know what my parents were thinking, particularly my mom, I would have to listen to her on the phone. And if she was mad at me, she would just be like, blah, like blabbering about these horrible things I did and was and all. But also I would hear, she did really good in school, like some compliment, but never
to you.
If I walked in the room, she would stop talking. Like there was almost like that's a no. Like we do not say kind things to people.
I know, it's so crazy. And what you're saying reminds me of really the tragedy of my mother's life. Her mother raised her without appreciation.
Yeah, well,
very consciously, because she didn't want her to get a big head. And it created. So when my mother had no self-confidence, had no way to really evaluate herself, and it created issues for her entire life. And it came from I'm sure my grandmother's wishes to have her be accepted in society and to be a good person. But, our child rearing practices are just so totally screwed up, in so many areas.
There was a documentary a while ago, and I kind of feel bad that they filmed that because whatever they did to that child, but it was about trauma. And so you see this little baby, 6 months old. I mean, he sits up, so maybe 6 months old, and it's an exchange around food, and the mother's feeding, and very interactive, very present, feeling the feelings, like the kid is happy, gives more, just really, really interactive. And the kid is clearly having a beautiful time. Like he's just like babbling, just like
yes,
happy kid, right? And at some point, directed by the experiment, they ask her to stop the connection, still feed the baby, but no longer. So put the food, pay attention to nothing, just like absolutely ignoring. It takes about 45 seconds for this baby to go berserk and start.
Berserko.
Absolutely. Which it tells us that trauma occurs at small, like you don't really need to be like, some people say, I wasn't beat up as a child. It's like, okay, well, there are degrees, but you could feel abandoned and not seen from not so much, was kind of what I took from that experiment.
Well, what I also hear is that it's about the quality of attention.
Yeah.
I think, attention, being seen, being attended to is and learning to read the signs of, what the baby wants, what the baby needs, I think she's sleepy now. And all of those are really about attention. Yeah. And if we don't give attention, and there are all kinds of studies about what happens to us when we don't have positive attention, or we have neglectful attention, or erratic attention. And so one of the biggest skills that I think that people can learn is how to give themselves curious attention. Like, hey, how are you? Oh, and just feeling into what are my sensations, and what emotions, how's my energy today? Just what am I noticing? And then also to be able to give attention clearly and directly and uninterrupted by distractions is probably the biggest thing that can contribute to our well-being.
I would imagine it's difficult to do if you don't give it to yourself a little bit. Like if I don't give myself attention, that I'd be able to be like, ooh, I'm really present with Katie. Like if I'm not present with myself, right? Like I really wouldn't have the skill to do that.
The exchange of attention, I think, is the most basic nutrient that creates happy people. And I've seen, like, we have some new friends who had a baby during the pandemic. And so I got to watch the evolution of really, really loving parents with their little boy. And what it really was about was an extended version of peekaboo.
Wow.
It's really like there'll be what scientists call a bid for attention. And they would respond to that. And then they would play with it a little bit. And then they would do something. And then there would be another, like, how do you want attention now? And so there were like, 1,000 different versions of peekaboo. But it was really about, I'm giving you attention in all of these different ways. And then I'm responding to the way that you're giving me attention. And it is, I think, the template for our creativity, for our ability to receive, for our ability to give attention to ourselves. So we look at ourselves the way we are looked at.
That's really beautiful. I am wondering, it's funny because I don't think what I'm about to say, but I think a lot of people would. Like, would it create a child that's a little like the world is not going to possibly be as attentive to their very need as they grow? Like, do you think too much of it? Or do you think, what would you say to someone that says, well, if I give so much attention to my child and then I send them into the world, what's going to happen to them?
I think that's at the very root of the question.
Good.
Am I going to make them narcissistic or spoiled or just only thinking about themselves? And I think that the answer is actually totally the opposite. That when children are richly given attention and appreciated and love for themselves, that they very naturally will then begin giving attention and being interested in what is going on in the world because they feel safe. So the attention creates the very baseline, the foundation of safety from which we can explore.
Wow.
And when there isn't attention given, or it's very rare, or I don't know if I'm okay. I don't know if it's okay for me to be here. But when I have that sense of, here I am, and everything I do is wonderful. It actually doesn't make people selfish. It makes them open. And I think there's just, lots and lots of research, but you just need to kind of look around to see, children who are very poised have gotten that poise because first they feel safe. And then they can start venturing out. And that altruism, that giving to others, like sharing toys and, sharing food or candy. When children have been raised in love, they naturally do that. They don't have to be trained to do that. And that's something that scientists in the West were really surprised about when they would see in other so-called primitive cultures, they share. And
not being taught.
There's not even a question. If they've got something, they share it. Yeah. And they don't just take it all for themselves and hoard it. And that kind of hoarding, I think, comes from, I have so little that I'm going to hold on to what I have.
Yes. We were talking about kindness earlier, which really moved me because in France, I think kindness is a bit of it's treated like you're sick or something. It's not, it's like sarcasm is it's the national sport. Like, can you say something that's like, poking or something? And so I really grew up in an environment, like it took me a while to realize how unkind, and I don't think it was deliberately like, I want to be unkind to you. It was just the ways, of communicating. And I remember being with my friend Paul, and I was chatting with him of, nothing particular, but he started noticing that my language was very much filled with like self-dissing. Of course I woke up late. Of course, some version of attacking myself. And I remember
diminishing yourself.
Like exactly. And kind of not giving myself the benefit of the doubt, assuming that I was going to be late for the thing, or assuming, just really
assuming the worst.
Kind of assuming the worst, certainly not assuming the best, certainly a version of assuming the worst. But I remember, this is the part I wanted to show you. So he gets up and he brings this thing and he goes, I'm going to give you, that was 25 years ago. I've had this thing for 25 years.
Oh,
do not be, look at that. So his name is Kinder.
I love, all of those attributes you're talking about of including,
right,
and being with and playing and kindness.
Right. And so he gave it to me and he was like, you cannot not be kind when you look at this thing. You won't be able to. Your heart will melt. So he gave it to me. It lives on my desk or wherever I am. And it literally is like, every time I hear this, like, not enoughness or whatever, it's like, and it's just, we just have this cute interaction. So I do think that as a how-to, having objects, like that thing sitting there, right? It's like an anchor. Like I cannot be unkind for very long, just because, the moment, of course, the friend, the fact that it's been so many years, it's rich. It's not just a toy. it has, gravity.
Well, it was given to you with such intention.
Yes.
And such love, and it carries it. And I think it's just a wonderful how is to have. I have, as a matter of fact, I have puppets. I use puppets in my work, especially in couples course, having puppets that people can both speak through. They have a smushy puppet and they have a dragon puppet.
Yeah.
And so they're critical, when they're in their critical voice, they use their finger puppet, but they also have a smushy puppet that is there. You cannot not be kind or more gentle or more loving in looking at that. And so I think props are really a wonderful idea, something to remind you, because we have so much in our world that's reminding us that life is hard and things are going to hell all the time. And so to have something that reminds you of possibility that bypasses your thinking brain also. Because I think also part of what you're talking about with France, and I think it's also, in the States as well, there's a culture of sophistication, and which has to do with irony and sarcasm and hidden innuendos, to see if the other person can catch it. And it's a kind of a dart throwing.
Yes.
It's a kind of a verbal dart throwing for entertainment. And I could always feel the prickles of that. I'm like, am I supposed to be enjoying this?
Yeah, this is hurting. This is I remember when Gay, we were having lunch and we were talking about sarcasm, and he gave me a distinction, which please correct me if that's not, what you remember. But I remember when he said sarcasm, like humor it's not attempting to say the thing that I don't really have the courage to say. Like sarcasm is like, you're horrible. I'm just kidding, when really I want to tell you that something you did hurt me or something vulnerable. But instead of doing that, I'm going to use this bizarre language.
Well, it's a sideways.
Exactly.
It's like pulling the legs out from under someone.
Yeah.
And has that startled. And then, I was just kidding.
Yeah. They're just kidding. They're just kidding.
Right. Yeah, exactly what you're doing that.
Kidding? Yeah. It's like, who's laughing? Like, you laughing? I'm not laughing.
Yeah. And just the pure appreciation of another person. A lot of that gets like, you're being mushy and stop it. That's like you're stupid if you're coming from kindness. I have to say, we were just traveling. Gay and I just traveled in the last week. And what I noticed was the level of kindness from strangers and people wanting to assist. Now we had, Gay was in a wheelchair, still recovering from his leg, but even so, like I was just standing there and people would ask if, is there anything that can I assist? But also just the level of I'd like you to come first, or I'm going to slow down to let you come. But also just the kind looks. And more softness. And I thought, wow, this is encouraging, because it was in a busy airport and where people just kind of ignore everybody else. But that wasn't the case. And so I thought, well, maybe something is shifting in our giving and receiving of attention. So for me, that's one of the main things that I do when I'm out in the world, is that I go by somebody and there maybe is just that little moment where we see each other and there may, and there's this little interaction, and then we go by on the, on the throughways there. And I feel refreshed by that. Like, it's nice to be a human rather than, it sucks to be a human.
And they feel it too. It's like, that is what you're getting back. There's been some research done. Like, if I smile at you as a stranger, how long does it take for you? Like, if I really smile at you, it's not going to take long. Like my mouse, instantly you were just like, like we will smile at each other. It'd be a fun, maybe as we're wrapping up, it would be sweet. Like, we could start some sort of like, what, right?
Totally. That's totally what I'm up to, is to create little things that people can do. Like the first one that I find really makes a difference is that if I generate appreciation in myself,
Yes.
I'm just appreciating, like I'm appreciating the quality of light right now. And I'm appreciating that that I'm warm. You know, it just can be very, very simple. And then I come into an interaction in appreciation.
Yes.
So I'm like putting clouds of appreciation out and little beams of appreciation. And even that is enough to begin to shift that most people are in. And so I think it's a kind of a sneak attack. It's a sneak appreciation attack. It makes a big difference.
It's such an, as you were talking, I just realized that I don't take it for granted ever, but to be in your space and your friendship, that I get to be receiving of this appreciation as that's contributed to me having a solid spine and a happy life. Truly, truly, truly.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that.
See how delicious? I mean, I'm not hungry. I don't want to go run anywhere.
Exactly.
It's delicious to give that to each other.
That it's filling up our reservoirs with something really delicious, then nourishing, that can also be renewed and replenished and added to. So, delicious.
As we actually wrapping up, it's funny because we have Abby that's with us. She's our producer and she's with us in the background all the time. And she doesn't get to be, she gets to be a fly on the wall, but I really wanted, I know you're hearing us. I just wanted to thank you, Abby, as well, because really you make this thing go around and smoothly. And I so appreciate you.
Oh, yes. And additionally, Abby, your presence is really palpable. It really is the swing that we're rocking back and forth in the space in which we can invent. So thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Sophie.